Max sat in the dimly lit living room, the faint hum of the clock marking the seconds of his solitude. On the coffee table before him lay the evidence, bank statements meticulously annotated, transaction records revealing unaccounted-for withdrawals, and at the center of it all, a single page showing the existence of a hidden account under Camille's name. His hands rested on his knees, steady despite the torrent of emotions swirling inside him. He had always prided himself on noticing the small details, the subtle way Camille's demeanor shifted when he mentioned their savings, her recent, almost too convenient work trips. But this betrayal had been meticulously concealed. It wasn't until he discovered the missing funds during his routine financial review that he began to dig deeper. Each clue led him closer to the truth. And now, the truth was laid bare. The sound of heels clicking against the hardwood echoed from the hallway. Camille stepped into the room, pausing when she saw him. Her cheerful greeting faltered as her gaze fell on the papers. Max looked up, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but edged with a finality that sent a chill through the air. Camille froze at the doorway, her smile evaporating as her eyes darted to the table. The arrangement was deliberate, every damning document spread out in plain view, their meaning unmistakable. For a fleeting moment, her mask slipped. Max caught it, a flash of panic in her eyes, a tightening of her grip on the purse dangling from her shoulder. But then, just as quickly, her composure returned. "What's this about?" she asked lightly, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. She stepped closer, her movements careful, as if approaching a wild animal. Max didn't answer immediately. He leaned back, studying her in the low light. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the armchair across from him. Camille hesitated. "Max, if this is about the money—" "Sit," he repeated, the quiet authority in his tone leaving no room for argument. With a practiced sigh of exasperation, she sat down, crossing her legs in a way that seemed intended to exude confidence, but Max knew her well enough to see the subtle tremor in her fingers as she placed her purse on the floor. "For months," he began, his voice even. "I've noticed things, small discrepancies, missing amounts in the account we share. You'd think I wouldn't notice?" He tilted his head, the faintest smile touching his lips, a smile devoid of warmth. Camille opened her mouth to respond, but he held up a hand silencing her. "At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe an automatic withdrawal or a forgotten expense. But then I traced the transactions." He reached for a paper and slid it across the table toward her. "Care to explain this?" She glanced at it, her eyes narrowing as if she didn't understand. "Max, I don't—" "Oh, don't insult me," he interrupted, his voice rising just enough to make her flinch. He leaned forward now, the weight of his gaze pinning her in place. "This account, these transfers, they lead to one place, your secret fund, your escape plan." Camille's calm facade cracked. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her fingers twitched toward the paper, then withdrew as if it were on fire. "It's not what you think," she finally managed, her voice wavering. "Oh, really?" Max said, leaning back again. He gestured to the pile of documents. "Then tell me, Camille, what exactly is it? Enlighten me, because to me it looks like you've been siphoning off our money, preparing to leave. Care to explain what I've got wrong?" She hesitated too long. "Max," she began, shifting in her seat, "I was going to tell you. Things between us, they haven't been the same. I just needed to protect myself." Max's laughter was cold, a sound that cut through her attempt at justification. "Protect yourself? From what, Camille? From me?" His voice turned icy, a dangerous edge creeping in. The man who stood by you, trusted you, built a life with you? She stared at him, her carefully constructed defense crumbling under his relentless scrutiny. "Save it," Max said flatly. "You've lied to me. That ends tonight." Camille's silence was deafening, but for the first time since Max began speaking, she looked genuinely unsure of what to say. Her carefully curated image of control, always her greatest asset, had slipped. It was in the way she gripped the arms of the chair too tightly, the way her foot bounced nervously against the hardwood floor. "I didn't lie," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not really." Max raised an eyebrow, his expression incredulous. "Not really? So, what would you call it? Creative withholding of information?" Camille's lips pressed into a thin line. "I was going to tell you," she said, leaning forward slightly, as if to close the distance between them. Her tone shifted, adopting the faintly pleading edge she often used to diffuse their arguments. "I just needed more time to figure things out." "Figure things out?" Max repeated, his voice cold. "Like how to disappear without a trace? Or how to take even more of our money before you ran?" He gestured to the evidence again, his tone sharpening. "You're not doing this for us, Camille. You're doing it for you. Don't bother denying it. I've seen everything." She sat back abruptly, folding her arms. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand," Max shot back, his voice firm. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been planning this for months. Tell me, Camille, when were you going to have the decency to let me in on your little plan? Or was I just supposed to wake up one day to find you and the money gone?" Camille opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked away, her gaze drifting toward the windows, as if the answer might be waiting in the night beyond. Max waited, his patience dwindling. "Well?" he pressed. She exhaled sharply, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Fine," she snapped. "You want the truth? Yes, I've been moving money. Yes, I've been thinking about leaving. But do you know why, Max?" She leaned forward now, her voice rising. "Because I'm tired. Tired of always feeling like I'm second place to your work, your routines, your damned meticulousness. Every day, it's the same thing, you monitoring everything, controlling everything. I needed space to breathe." Her sudden outburst hung in the air, sharp and bitter. Max stared at her, his expression unreadable. "So your solution," he said slowly, his voice eerily calm, "was to betray me, to destroy everything we've built together, all because you needed space." Camille hesitated, her defiance wavering under his scrutiny. "You don't understand," she said again, softer this time. "I didn't know how else to—" Max cut her off with a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "You didn't know how else to what? Communicate? Work through problems like adults? No, Camille, this isn't about me. This is about you. Your selfishness, your lies, your plan to walk away and leave me with nothing." Her composure fractured entirely. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And yet, here we are," Max said coldly, his eyes never leaving hers. Camille's whispered admission hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. The tension between them felt like a tangible thing, coiling tighter with every second of silence. Max rose from his chair, the movement deliberate, calculated. He crossed the room to stand by the window, his back to her, staring out at the darkness beyond. "What's your endgame, Camille?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "What was supposed to happen? You take the money, disappear, and, what, start over? Pretend the life we built together never existed?" Her hands clenched into fists on her lap, the skin of her knuckles pale. "You think this was easy for me?" she shot back, her tone wavering between anger and desperation. "Do you think I wanted it to come to this? I was suffocating, Max. You don't see me anymore." He turned to face her, his expression a mask of cold detachment. "Don't see you? he repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. Camille, I've done nothing but see you. I've supported you, trusted you, I've sacrificed for you. And this is how you repay me? Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. You don't get it, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't plan to hurt you. I needed to take control of my life again. Control? Max said, stepping closer, his tone darkening. You had control, Camille. You had choices. And instead of talking to me, instead of facing whatever it is you think was missing, you chose to lie, to steal. You took control by betraying me. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Because you never would have understood, she cried, her composure unraveling. You always act so calm, so put together, like you have all the answers. But you don't. You never listen. You're always 2 steps ahead, planning everything. There's no room for anyone else's feelings, least of all mine. Max's jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. And yet, somehow I'm the villain, he said quietly. The one who's always worked to make sure you were happy, secure. Tell me, Camille, what exactly was your plan for me? Were you going to leave me a note, an apology? Or would you have just disappeared without a trace? Her silence was all the answer he needed. He shook his head, a bitter smile twisting his lips. You really thought you could outmaneuver me, didn't you? He said, his voice laced with both anger and pity. All those months of sneaking around, siphoning money, thinking I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't figure it out. Camille's face crumpled, her bravado giving way to panic. Max, please, she pleaded, stepping toward him. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Max held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. Fix it? He said, his voice colder than ever. No, Camille, there's no fixing this. You broke us. And now it's my turn to decide how this ends. Camille stood frozen, the weight of Max's words pressing down on her like a physical force. For the first time, she truly understood that she had lost control, not just of the situation, but of the man standing before her. Max was no longer the attentive, predictable husband she had relied on to tolerate her small deceits. He was something colder, sharper, and unyielding. Max turned away from her, his movements deliberate, and reached for the last document on the table. It was a printed record of her hidden account, highlighted in red where the transfers had been made. He held it up between them, his eyes locked on hers. This, he said, his voice measured and steady, is the proof of everything you tried to hide. But here's the thing, Camille. I've already made my move. Her eyes widened in alarm. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. He set the document down and pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times before holding it up. This is a notification from the bank, he explained. Your little escape fund? It's frozen. Every penny you siphoned is back where it belongs, in our joint account. Malcave. Camille's breath caught, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. Max, you can't. You had no right. I had every right, Max interrupted, his voice cutting through her protest. You stole from me, from us. Don't you dare try to play the victim here. She took a step toward him, her hands raised as if in surrender. Please, Max, I made a mistake, but we can work through this. I don't want to lose you. He regarded her with a look that was almost pitying. You lost me the moment you decided to betray me, he said, his tone devoid of emotion. The rest was just a matter of timing. Camille's panic turned to desperation. What are you saying? Are you leaving me? Max let out a bitter laugh. No, Camille. You're the one who planned to leave. I'm just making sure it happens on my terms. He stepped closer, his presence towering over her. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, I'm filing for divorce. You'll get nothing but what the law allows. No more, no less. Her voice rose, tinged with hysteria. You can't do this. I have rights. And I have evidence, Max replied coolly. He gestured to the table. Enough to prove you've been planning this for months. Any court will see it for what it is. Financial betrayal. Camille sank into the chair, her head in her hands. Max, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't do this. I'll do anything. You'll sign the papers, Max said, cutting her off, and you'll leave this house tonight. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. Tonight? Yes, tonight, he confirmed, stepping back and crossing his arms. I've already packed your things. They're by the door. You can stay at a hotel or anywhere else. I don't care. But you're not staying here. The finality of his words struck her like a blow. For a moment, she stared at him, searching for some trace of the man who had once loved her. But all she found was the unyielding resolve of a man who had been pushed too far. Without another word, Camille rose and walked to the door. She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, as if expecting him to stop her. But Max didn't move. He simply watched as she stepped out into the night, the door clicking shut behind her. The silence that followed was profound. But Max didn't feel relief, only an aching emptiness. He sat down heavily on the couch, staring at the table littered with the remnants of her betrayal. He had won, but the victory was hollow.